It's not very often that a pilot survives an inadvertent IMC encounter in icing conditions, especially if that pilot is a VFR-only private pilot. But after spinning out of the clouds and entering a spiral dive, this pilot, along with his family, was able to recover and crash land his aircraft into a wooded area and live to tell about it, and tells the story here. Let's check it out. My name's Juan Brown, you're watching the BLANCOLIRIO channel, and we're also going to talk about the difference between spins and spiral dives. This accident occurred back on 26 February when the owner pilot of this aircraft, November 43 Delta November, crashed on Equinox Mountain just west of Manchester, Vermont. This is a 1972 Piper Cherokee 235 powered by the Lycoming 0540 engine, obviously with no de-icing or anti-icing capability at all outside of carb heat and pitot heat. The accident occurred about 8:30 in the morning, and the family was helicoptered to safety pretty soon after the accident. Here they are being lifted out of the forest. Local NBC meteorologist Tyler Jankowski was following the story and caught the weather exactly right and the flight path of this accident flight, showing the icing conditions over the area at the time, icing between 1,500 and 6,000 feet over Vermont at the time of the accident. He also states that over Manchester, the ceiling was 700 feet with calm winds. Here is a view of the weather nearby on that same morning. Here's a look of the Cherokee 235 before the accident, November 43 Delta November. Here's the ADS-B data from FlightAware showing the aircraft departing Martin State real early in the morning, about 6 o'clock local time, climbing initially to 3,500 feet, then popping up to 4,800 feet, presumably 4,500 feet in VFR hemispheric altitudes, then down to 3,300 feet. So he's apparently trying to dodge the weather, climbing and descending, trying to stay out of the clouds. Then he gets down into some scud running, all the way down to 1,700 feet, 1,800 feet. Now the terrain in this area is as high as 1,000 feet. And then he decides the scud running is not working, so he climbs up to 5,000 feet, then tries to work down around the clouds, 4,300 feet, 4,300 feet. His ground speed's doing good at about 150 to 160 miles an hour. Then all of a sudden at about 4,000 feet, loss of control of the aircraft, and the ground speed drops right off. And if we look a little closer at the data, all we see is a little hook to the left. Now let's look at the track log, and we can see all those data points. Maintaining control of the aircraft right until the last couple of data points, 3,800 feet and rate of descent exceeding 1,200 feet per minute, and then recovering at 800 feet per minute. Now here's this pilot's own story in his own words here on First Weather 5 or NBC 5, the local news station. It's very rare that we get somebody to be so candid about an accident so soon after an accident. Now, please don't slag this pilot in the comment section below on this channel for the way he sounds or the decisions he's explaining to you as he tells his story. He's simply telling his story shortly after a very traumatic crash. We don't know what kind of treatment he's had following this incident, but just listen up and we're going to point out a few things along the way here. This is one of those very rare looks where you see a face behind the data, a face of somebody that survived.
We started approaching and we were seeing clouds. We went over some clouds and around some clouds, and as we were getting closer to Rutland, there was like a big open hole So we thought, well, maybe now's the time to go down under to get, to the airport, because it was reported at moderate VFR, like maybe 10 minutes sooner, because I have all the equipment in the plane to check real-time weather, and METARS is a instantaneous weather report from the airport. And when I checked 10 minutes prior, it was 1,700 feet MVFR. Once I got down in that hole, and I was like, this, it doesn't look like 1,700 feet. And I checked the METARS, and it said 800 feet. And I was like, this ain't good. So I was like, we got to climb. We can't go through this. So it just seemed to be building so fast. I mean, you're up in the air, things that happen so slowly, it seems, and stuff. But when we got in that position, just seemed to this system, this mountain, it just engulfed us. So as we were climbing out, we ended up entering the clouds. And as a VFR pilot, I'm not supposed to be in the clouds at all, and I have no experience in the clouds. And the plane very quickly gained icing. We've seen it on the windshield. We've seen it on the wings. Josiah was right on the carb heat, my co-pilot. And we knew we had icing, but the carb heat took care of it. And we were climbing. We got to 5,500 feet. And I tried to move more west because I knew it was clearer over there before this all happened. And it was a bad decision because it took me closer to the mountain, even though I knew it was clearer on that side of the mountain. And but at the 5,500.
So here's what he's talking about geographically. The crash occurred here on Equinox Mountain. He would like to proceed over here to the east where he can get over some lower terrain over Highway 7 here, but the weather is pushing him off to the west over the higher terrain.
Because it took me closer to the mountain, even though I knew it was clearer on that side of the mountain. And but at the 5,500 feet or 5,000 feet, I can't remember, but I was above this mountain, and I started to come, to the west, and the plane just it wouldn't maintain altitude anymore. It usually should climb at 106 miles an hour, and at 106 miles an hour it wouldn't even fly. And we stalled, and he yells out, "Dad, we're stalling, so I did a stall recovery, tried to level out at 106, full power, full prop. It just wouldn't maintain altitude. And we started a couple stalls. Now, like I said, I'm not an instrument pilot. I'm in the clouds. I can't see nothing. We're really scared. And then we get in a fully developed stall spin. For people that don't know what that is, the plane stalls, the wing drops, and you start they call it the death spiral. We were losing full deflection on the artificial horizon, 2,000 feet pegged on the vertical speed, 160 mile an hour, straight to the ground, spinning. And Garmin G5, I had my eyes on that thing. I had just seen, and I just did a spin recovery and pulled out. And when we pulled out, we came out of the clouds and we seen the mountain. I turned away from it, tried to level out. It stalled again. We seen the mountain again, the cliff, it turned away again. We stalled the last time, I believe. When we came out of the mountains, I seen this wall of rocks, the trees over there, and I knew at that point, this plane's crashing. I'm not flying out of this. So I picked my spot, and I just tried to match the grade of the mountain as we climbed, and I just pulled back, and I just followed the grade of those trees until I stalled at 56 mile an hour. I stalled into the trees. Luckily, we went right between two trees. It ripped the wings off. We pitched down a little bit, kind of heading into the mountain, but we hit some smaller trees that kind of acted like a ramp, and we had at least 4 or 5 feet of snow up there that kind of made like a little you know, little kind of a swoosh. We came to rest with a tree into the dashboard, but all we got is he's got some stitches. I got some stitches. I got this little broken bone. My daughter, not a scratch. My precious little girl, just not a tiny little scratch and a little whiplash. We all got some whiplash.
Wow. Just a miraculous recovery after a devastating stall spin spiral dive into icing conditions, or caused by icing conditions. He mentioned earlier that he put the carb heat on. Well, of course, that's only going to take care of the engine. He's got no other anti-icing or de-icing capability other than pitot heat to keep the airspeed alive on that aircraft. Once that icing starts building up on that aircraft, you're going down. If you're flying a single engine aircraft in icing conditions without de-icing capability, and those icing conditions extend all the way to the ground, you're not going to make it. In this case, he was just able to break out enough in the last couple of 100 feet of altitude there to visually acquire the terrain and make his bid for that crash landing spot and smashing that airplane up into that spot in a very well executed full stall crash landing. Now, I want to reemphasize this point.
Stalls. Now, like I said, I'm not an instrument pilot. I'm in the clouds. I can't see nothing.
He's not an instrument rated pilot, and he's got himself in the clouds and he can't see anything, so he's disoriented. Spatial disorientation will get you.
We're really scared. And then we get in a fully developed...
It's not scary, it's terrifying if you haven't been there.
Developed stall spin. For people that don't know what that is, the plane stalls, the wing drops, and you start death, they call it the death spiral. We were losing full deflection on the artificial horizon, 2,000 feet pegged on the vertical speed, 160 mile an hour, straight to the ground, spinning.
Okay, so now I want to talk about the difference between spins, fully developed spins, and spiral dives. And what's getting people in these conditions is they're not so much getting into a fully developed spin as they are getting into a spiral dive, especially the very disorienting spiral dive that you find yourself in once you have spatial disorientation. Let's go over to the Waco here for a little spin review. Believe it or not, a spin is a controlled form of flight. It is a method of controlling the airplane. It's when you get into a spiral dive, that's when you've lost control of the aircraft. If you get into a spiral dive, yes, that airspeed's going to increase to the point where you're going to exceed the VNE of the aircraft and possibly rip the wings off in the recovery of the aircraft. But if you can get into and keep the aircraft in a spin, that's actually a controlled form of flight. And it was commonly taught in the old days, and not recommended here on the BLANCOLIRIO channel at all, but back in the old days, the old timers, the old airmail pilots, before instrument flying skills were developed and instruments capable of flying in instrument conditions were developed, the emergency technique for getting out of the weather was to enter a spin and spin all the way through the clouds in a controlled fashion, break out of the clouds, break out of the weather. Hopefully you've got enough altitude below you to recover from the spin, and in these older aircraft they recover real quickly and then continue on VFR. But it takes a lot to keep an aircraft in a spin. You have to keep the stick all the way back and the rudder all the way deflected in order for it to stay in a spin. If you are able to keep that aircraft in a spin, the airspeed, you can see that there, will remain at its stall speed. The airspeed will not increase. Yeah, your rate of descent's going to pick up tremendously as you spin down, but you're coming down at a controlled rate. But the moment you let off that back stick in these, especially in these modern aircraft, they are very stable airplanes. They're very reluctant to spin. You absolutely have to force it into the spin and keep it in there. If you let off that back stick a little bit, it'll break the spin and just enter into a spiral dive and just pick up speed like crazy. Watch this. So note the airspeed. We're stalling the aircraft here at about 60 indicated. We're here at 5,900 feet, power back to idle. By the way, it's very important that you keep the ailerons neutral in a spin. Okay, the aircraft brakes to the right. Now look at that airspeed. It's still there at 60. We're going to do about one turn on this spin, and I'm already starting my recovery. The moment I start the recovery, that airspeed's going to take off. But right now, well, it's a lagging instrument. The vertical speed's only 500 feet per minute, but it's lagging. But watch, as soon as I start the recovery, watch this airspeed. Recover. Hear the wind in the wires? Look at that VSI now, pegged at 4,000 feet per minute down. His VSI only went to 2,000 feet. And look at the altitude. We're going to recover after having lost 1,000 feet, just like that. So in the weather, it's not so much the spin that'll get you, it's the spiral dive. Now the Waco's all certified for aerobatics, and I'm pulling a solid 3 Gs on this pullout. Each time I get to there, I straighten it out and then 3 Gs to get it back on the horizon as quick as possible to minimize this increase in airspeed. But if you were able to keep the aircraft in a spin, that airspeed would just stay right there at the stalled speed the whole time. The wing is stalled. It's just going to stay right there. And this is another good lesson that you can stall an aircraft at any attitude or any airspeed. And here we are pointed straight to the ground, and that thing is still pegged right there at stall speed because we are in and keeping it in a spin.
Losing full deflection on the artificial horizon, 2,000 feet pegged on the vertical speed, 160 mile an hour.
So at 160 miles an hour, he's not technically in a spin, he's in a spiral, like he accurately calls it, a death spiral, or the classic spatial disorientation spiral.
Straight to the ground, spinning, and Garmin G5, I had my eyes on that thing. I just seen, and I just did a spin recovery and pulled out. And when we pulled,
okay, you do not do a spin recovery with the ailerons if you're in an actual spin. Now, if you're in a spiral dive, yeah, you can stop the rolling and then get on the pull and gently pull that aircraft out without exceeding the G limit of the aircraft, and hopefully without exceeding the VNE, or the maximum speed of the aircraft. But you do not recover a spin with the ailerons. You recover a spin with the rudder. You keep the ailerons neutral if you're in an actual no-kidding spin. Adding aileron in a spin will only exacerbate the situation.
Out, we came out of the clouds and we seen the mountain. I turned away from it.
Once he was able to acquire visual reference to the ground below, he was able to begin flying again as a VFR pilot, and he did an excellent job on the recovery with what he had to work with. So just an amazing story to hear a survivor of one of these otherwise nearly fatal IMC encounters by a VFR pilot. I hope he continues to tell this story. I applaud him for his candor in this interview. This happens to VFR pilots almost all the time. Every year we've got reports of these sort of accidents happening, and folks wonder why or how or what happens. Well, that's it right there. And before you go slagging this pilot, especially if you're a newer pilot or you haven't gotten your instrument rating yet, this can easily happen to any of us VFR pilots that get into the clouds, especially if you've not had any instrument training. The best advice here is to use that aeronautical decision making and make the decision to not go in the first place by thoroughly checking the weather and just getting the credit card out. Divert early, avoid the rush, get the credit card out, get yourself on the ground, Being down here on the ground wishing you were up there rather than being up there wishing you were down here on the ground is not a good place to be. Use your superior judgment to avoid having to use your superior flying skills like he did in crash landing this aircraft. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.